I think the approval is really significant because of the brain metastases population. We have a lot of great HER2 agents in our arsenal, but a lot of them don't cross the blood-brain barrier. Our traditionally used drugs in this setting, neratinib and lapatinib, can be more toxic. They also hit EGFR or HER1 in addition to HER2. And we know when we hit EGFR, we get more toxicity such as skin rash and GI effects like diarrhea. And so I think this is very important for patients because it's well tolerable and it gives us another drug that can be active against brain metastases, which we desperately need in this population, as up to 50% of the people with HER2 positive disease will develop brain metastases at some point in their disease course.
Up to 50% of patients with HER2 positive metastatic disease may develop brain mets during the course of their disease. So this is a very significant problem, and currently standard treatments have been largely limited to local therapies such as resection of the brain metastasis or radiation treatment, either focal or whole brain radiation. And in the HER2CLIMB study, approximately 50% of the trial population enroll had either history of or active presence of brain metastases, which is very representative of the real world population. And of those with brain metastases, approximately 40% had either new active disease or progressing disease after prior local therapy. And so I think one of the most striking results in my mind from the HER2CLIMB data was that among the patients with brain metastases who received tucatinib, a quarter of them remained on trial at the 1-year time point, whereas among those with brain metastases who did not receive tucatinib, none of those patients remained on trial at 1 year. So although we still need to do much better than 25%, this is a huge step forward for patients. And the other thing to highlight is that the HER2CLIMB study provides a very meaningful data set, and in that there are many more interesting endpoints specific to the brain metastasis population that will be forthcoming, such as intracranial progression rates, duration of response in the brain, and also a big question as to whether tucatinib may have a preventative role to mitigate spread or progression to sites in the central nervous system in patients who did not have a history of brain metastasis at baseline.
This is an unmet need, again, because up to 50% of people will develop HER2 positive brain metastases over the course of their disease. And so it's important that we have drugs that not only work great from the neck down, but also work great in the brain. And these are the oral molecules, neratinib, lapatinib, and now tucatinib. I think tucatinib's advantage here is it tends to be a little bit more easily tolerated in my experience, without the rash and without the diarrhea that we often see with the other two agents. I think there was a very telling statistic in this trial. For patients that had brain metastases, 0% of them were still on the trial at 1 year if they were not receiving tucatinib. But if we looked at those patients that were receiving tucatinib with brain metastases, a quarter of those patients remained on the trial progression-free at a year. And so I think that statistic 0 versus a quarter really shows us how active this regimen was for this patient population and how important it's going to be moving forward.